actually a big branch. The wind took that down. So it's kind of cool, but it's not going to be there for long. So I want to react to a video clip of Bill Burr appearing on Russell Brand's podcast, and I like these two guys a lot. I like the fact that they're very self-aware, and we'll talk about that during this video. So this is a clip off of a longer video that you actually have to pay to see, which I'll probably do. But this is just a little clip, and it's going to be in the description below.
And I feel like that as I said to you before, that your sensitivity plus the force of your invective is part of your. It seems to me, as an outsider and as a fan, like part of your essential quality, and that's a sort of an expression of who you authentically actually are. And I feel that all of us have to find that, whether we're creative people or whether we ain't, to occupy our family lives, to occupy our professional lives. And I feel that if we don't find that, if we don't find some point of access, we live in various forms of frustration.
So invective is a word I would like to make use of. We hear a lot of it these days. Right here, he's making a great point that two seemingly contrasting traits, sensitivity and invective, are working together to make something really unique. And that's how Burr comes across. He's not exactly likable, but his underlying vulnerability makes him likable. Here's someone who, like Brand, has had a lot of therapy, and that's one of the main reasons I'm drawn to this pair. So I was really excited to see that they were talking. You can almost see in Burr's material an acceptance of his anger, which is often the result of extreme intelligence in an imperfect world, plus a sensitive temperament. That tends to make people angry because they kind of see how things should be done and see how far reality is from that should. But that's a problem in itself. So Russell is also saying that no matter who you are, you need to be able to express yourself authentically in the world somehow. You need to alignment in terms of what you really think and feel and how you manifest it in the world. So many of our problems stem from, one, that we don't really know who we are, which makes us susceptible to suggestions, which is a big problem today, by the way. And two, even if we do know who we are, we don't really know how to relay it to others. We're too scared or ashamed. What he's talking about is congruence, which is Carl Rogers' term. And this means, how can you make all aspects of your life some expression of yourself? This can be challenging sometimes when it comes to jobs, for example, where your freedom is often curtailed. But I had a drawing teacher once tell us that the most creative people were the Renaissance artists who had to follow a strict rubric of how characters in religious paintings are portrayed. It was very, very specific. You know, they would have to have 3 items of something or other on their clothing, and the hand would have to be in this position. And it was the creativity that made those paintings come alive, even though the actual structure of the paintings were all the same. So it's the same thing in work, for example. How are you going to express yourself authentically in a situation where you're kind of not supposed to? That's going to require some creativity.
Various forms
a turning point for me was I had to realize that I was hurting people, and then I had to figure out how I was hurting people. Because there's a lot of stuff that I say in my past specials that I go back and I just look at that and I just go, you didn't believe that. This is like some of the shit that I said about women. That was me. I was the complete opposite. I was a romantic. I wanted to be married. I wanted a family. I just threw just stuff that happened to me, failures and all of that. It's that weird thing where you're pushing away what you actually want for some, like whatever that defect in the human brain is. That's what I was doing. So, you know, and that goes back to people judging you as a comedian. It's just like, you know, it's very easy to watch that at face value and be like, oh, this guy, misogynistic, hates women, frat boy, blah, 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 blah. But it actually takes an effort.
So I'm not exactly sure what Bill is doing here, but unlike the fake apologies from the pseudo-woke celebrities and comedians, Burr sounds like he really is embarrassed by some of his previous material. Now, that actually does happen to all of us. There's a natural updating that we do and how that society does, in fact, about, for example, how other tribes are perceived and how we respond to this updating. You know, tribes are at odds with each other, and then they integrate. And we've seen this over the millennia. And we do it with ourselves, of course. And what I think Burr is doing is a typical update, not some kind of disingenuous top-down faux shame, because he certainly remains a profane comedian, but a bottom-up evolution of character. And by the way, in terms of men and women, his observations of relationship behavior are spot on. Like, there's one routine he does, I think it's his Netflix special, where in a relationship, the woman is a rare specimen under museum glass that's perfect and untouchable. And the man is this big galoot who has scaffolding around him all the time and is constantly in need of repair. That is so perfect. That's really how it plays up a lot. It plays out a lot in relationship dynamics, because, you know, you've got that, well, Jordan Peterson informed us that women choose. So he's sort of talking about that in that regard.
You know, I mean, that's how I'm watching some of this Trump shit, where you're just seeing like he'll say something, and you like, in order to keep my sanity, I got to picture the kid that didn't get the hug, the kid that was driven into business because his dad was good at it. And it's just like, did he want to do something else? Is his whole life an outer body experience? Or is he really...
I know most people don't think this, but the Trump phenomenon is much more complex than it looks, in my opinion. On the one hand, he's childish and self-absorbed and the kid that didn't get the hug. On the other hand, there might be a method to his madness, that kind of magician effect, that brujo effect I've talked about before, the fact that he's shaking things up. And I appreciate that he's shaking up some of these stale patterns. How is he doing it in an immature kind of offensive way? Well, yeah, but the actual outcome of what he's doing, some of these patterns need to be shaken up. Now, it can go in the direction of, you know, revamping our political system in a positive way, or it can go in the direction of nuclear war. I don't know. I'm very ambivalent about this phenomenon. But what I do know is he's certainly injecting some dynamism into the system.
And dude, it's like messing with my whole... I had this big discussion with my wife last night talking about the irresponsibility of religion with a higher power, where they go like, oh, people have freedom of choice. So it's just like, so when a serial killer is born, that's not on God at all. Like, whoa, leaned a little too far this way on that. Like, that's not on him at all. He gets to walk away from all of that. And if you watch like all of these nature videos and just how the whole thing is set up, that, you know, the big eat the little.
Okay, now let's talk about God. You've got Bill taking the usual atheist stance of, if God exists, why are there bad things and people on the earth? But God gives us a choice, not the freedom of choice that Burr is referring to, but the choice that if you get insight, or we could call it grace, then you do have a choice. And we have a choice as to how to respond to this insight, and we also have a choice as how to respond to a terrible situation or person. There are always ways that make things better. And if we are attuned to that we do have a choice, they may be the least worst option, let's just say, but it still is the least worst option, which means the best option. I like that term, because very frequently our choices are the least worst option. So my own theology at this point, I've said this before, is that we are somehow endowed with quality, and that's the structure of the universe. And you could say that's from God. I have a tendency to start thinking in that direction these days. And this quality creates the universe from the void. It's kind of like Tao, but there's a slight difference from Tao in that there's an overall drive towards what's better, towards freedom. And how that looks has infinite variety. You can't really look at the situation or outcome at this level of analysis. You can't say, well, here's a good thing, and this is how you do it. What you need to do is look at, does your reaction or solution have quality? And there's infinite varieties, like I said, of what is actually going to manifest in the world. Let's go back to that story from What is Good For, which any good situation, the farmer gets the horses, and then the son rides one of the horses and breaks his leg, etc., on down the line. So any situation that seems good could be bad, and vice versa. Your actual solution in the moment has to have quality, and that's going to give you the best chance to progress.
And then there's also that weird dichotomy where it's like, well, now you're an adult and you know what being hurt is. You shouldn't be doing that. So you got to hold them responsible. Like, I can't even like wrap my head around like that type of stuff. I see human behavior and what the hell we do to each other. And, if you watch this stuff on some serial killers, you hear about their childhood. And then there's a point where you want to rescue them before they become the adult monster. And and then I just sit there and go like, so this dude was beaten every day, he was molested, he was locked in a closet and all that. As a child, you go and rescue him. Then he goes out in the world and does what he does, what his parents taught him. And then they sort of divorce his childhood and then just go, this person is you're just supposed to be, that person's a monster, evil incarnate. He chose to be evil and blah, 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 blah.
I question to what extent the serial killers they're referring to are that way because of trauma. Something that profound typically is something like being a psychopath, which is almost invariably a birth defect. And I think they figured this out. So is pedophilia. And it is sad, unfortunate, and maybe you could call it profoundly unfair, but these people with these illnesses pretty much cannot be part of society, even though it's not their fault. It's that trolley car dilemma in that sense, but we do need to save the most people, even if we sacrifice some. However, if there are therapies that help people on the fringes of these serious problems, definitely anything should be implemented. And in fact, society rewards some psychopaths with tons of money. So that says something about our society, I guess. But we actually have an important question to grapple with. To what degree is someone who has suffered from an extreme trauma or from extreme trauma, to what extent are they responsible? And how long do their friends and partners and families need to keep engaging on a level which is uncomfortable to them? This is a good and difficult question, and so far, I think that if you somehow have something that breaks through the trauma worldview, and it is a worldview, and it occurs at all levels, by the way, biological, social, and intellectual. If you ever understand that you are hurting people and yourself because of the trauma, then you become responsible for getting help, for doing the work. So if you don't have this insight that you're hurting people, that's bad luck. And some trauma victims never see that they have any agency in this matter. Those people might not be able to have good relationships, and this is a problem.
I feel, though, that when sort of coming down with that to the serial killer thing, the fact that we find it abhorrent is evidence of a kind of, that there is a certainty to morality. In a universe where there is no, I'm not saying God, but no conceptualization of good, why not be a serial killer? I'm not saying morality is impossible without God. I'm saying that our awareness of goodness suggests that we have some intuitive understanding of goodness.
So here he's talking about the good. What is good? We know what's good, Russell says. It's this intuitive awareness he has. And it's like what Persick said, you've got the two essays, which one is better? You know which one is better. Most people do. But you have to take it as a dynamic, not in a thing in itself. He's trying to get to that, but in fact, we all know a serial killer is bad, kind of like we know pain is bad. There are some universals based on the fact that we are bodies with nerves in the world. But there are ways that pain can be good. and that killing can be good. So we have to be very careful about assigning good to objects, and we're going to talk about these concepts, killing as an object, let's just say. Arete, for example, means excellence in whatever you do, and if you are a warrior and you are going to kill, you need to be the best possible killer, and that makes you excellent. So that's something to think about.
In the natural world, I think it becomes different when you regard them as interconnected ecosystems rather than individuals. And that's something that comes up in what you said about the biography of a serial killer. How is the individual even responsible at all? If that individual is the recipient of all this negativity, then they go on. It's almost like it's only the fact that we see ourselves as enshrined by a bag of skin rather than as interconnected beings that makes culpability possible at all. I'm not saying people aren't responsible for their negative actions or for their crimes, or there shouldn't be consequences for bad actions. I'm saying in looking for a solution, it's pretty evident that if you grow up in a community or environment that has lots of negativity in it, you are likely to go out and enact that negativity elsewhere.
And you have to be able to see both at the same time. Individuals are embedded in the whole, which sounds obvious, but it's one thing we always forget. The whole gets dismissed a lot, but the answer is not to see that way all the time. A lot of the mystical stuff says this is the way to see reality, but in reality, if you did that, you wouldn't be alive. And we do need culpability for that reason, to protect ourselves. Let's just say, though, that probably a deeper spiritual understanding of reality is to be more weighted in the wholeness direction. And we could use a dose of that right about now.
In order to look for a solution, I think whether that's on an individual or a cultural level, that we have to, I feel personally, drop below my own. When you said that thing before about all of the hatred and the anger and the rage, I feel, and like suicide, in fact, I feel like we have to learn to drop below what we can, as we do in meditation, drop below the thing that you consider to be the self, this matrix of thoughts and ideas, which isn't really the self at all, according to a lot of meditative philosophy, but rather a kind of neurological static that's just taking place. And if you can learn to observe it and let it pass, you don't have to engage in the kind of actions of it. So, like, I don't think of a serial killer as
I like work because I engage in the static.
Likely to enact. We have to be careful about that claim because you're also enacting the negativity on yourself, which is something I find to be just as, if not more, likely. Now, what he's talking about here, dropping below, is probably the most useful thing to be said in terms of actually helping yourself out of all manner of psychological distress. This is because it connects you to the core of who you are in terms of the universe. So let's just say Atman and Brahman. You are part of it and it is part of you. And stepping outside of our ego can help us see a way through. So woe to the individual who cannot connect to some kind of spiritual dimension. We all engage in the static a lot. We are never going to be able to eliminate it. It's how we manage it that counts, which is something like seeing it, giving it its space, and letting go. It's part of you. So you see how all this is related.
I was just unraveling you was trying to say there is no God. I was trying to say there is a God. We were at an important junction.
He has to be he or she, it, they, whatever, has to be responsible for creating, the flawed human being.
Yeah.
Here's my deal. My deal is 35. Okay? By the time you're 35 years of age, you have to be looking at yourself as a flawed person, and you need to start trying, to undo what it is that you're doing. So my deal with the serial killer is, I'll give you all those people you killed up till 35. 35, you got to be sitting there going, wait a minute. I'm repeating what has been happening to me or whatever. Obviously, serial killer is an extreme example. Or maybe I'm superimposing. Maybe 35 is too old. It's just because 35 is where I started to get it. That things you're saying, things that you're doing, the way you're behaving is not good, and you're hurting people, and you need to work on this, and you're recreating what you hated in your childhood, what you didn't want, this intense, angry environment. I mean, it took me till I was like 30 to even realize I was angry. So that's how like not in touch with whatever the hell I was doing was was I don't know, was rolling around in my head or whatever. So
Again, is God responsible? He puts the drive towards the better into the universe, and that creates the universe. It's the logos, you could say. From the void is articulated a trajectory, a desire to get to total freedom, which is probably the void, so it's probably a circular thing. And that means there is always a choice. Sometimes that choice is flawed, and the flawed human being is information about the wrong choice, which is exactly what Burr is saying. Age 35, you have to start making some decisions, or whatever age. Interestingly, 35 is when Jung said you needed to start doing the work. And that means you are learning from the flawed human being, and hopefully you're seeing that potential, that flawed human being, or that potential for flaw, or even destruction, or even being a serial killer is within yourself. And that choice of being, that flaw is restricting, not freeing. And you can make a choice to be freer and more, and that freedom comes from, again, wholeness. That comes from having access to more of you. Almost any defense is going to be fragmenting, putting you in a state of not being in touch with yourself, or like Bill is saying here, knowing that he was angry. He didn't know he was angry. Again, the solution is wholeness. So I refer back to the spiritual stuff touched on by Russell, where you go below or above, however you want to characterize it. It's in those arenas that you have the best chance of insight. But of course, to get there to begin with, you need insight. And that's where the luck comes in, I guess, or grace. Once you're there, there's no turning back unless you do so intentionally. And that place of knowing and turning back maybe is where anything you want to characterize as moral, bad, or even evil might be.
I should pay you for a therapy session on this one.
No way, no way. It's amazing to talk to you. Although I was just about to... I'm a person who digs like Jungian therapy and all that stuff around mythology. And I was thinking about, like, now that you are freed from the tyranny of poverty, and from the tyranny of being people that you are not, the hobbies that you found are like drumming, like with all of its percussion and rhythm and the basic sort of rhythms of life, and flying helicopters and the transcendent and the escapes. I can see the appetites that are in you that are reaching out into expression, as well as the brilliance of your art form.
Both these hobbies are therapies that Bill does, percussion and flying around in the helicopter. So percussion, movement, dance, they allow a traumatized person or a damaged person to reconnect with their body on a visceral level. Some of that going back to your essence and regrowing yourself, let's say, from that embodied level of understanding. If you can get your body to feel connected to the world, and that's what drumming and dancing and movement does, it can be healing for that reason, because it puts you back in sort of a primordial state where it's you and the universe. And if you have healed that part of yourself, the body, world, connection, then you have one element of you that's now solid. And what is missing in a lot of us is a solid foundation, and this is one way to get it. In fact, in certain approaches to healing from trauma, this can be considered more effective than talk therapy, which, unless you're evoking a connection to the traumatized parts who don't have access to language, this may be the best way to get in there and heal those parts. Even in trauma therapy, if you're doing talk therapy, you have to kind of get an emotional connection to the traumatized parts. It's not like going through the list of terrible things that were done to you and talking them out and then you're better. That has some utility in the sense that you are connected to the person you're talking to and you're being seen and heard. But typically that in itself isn't really going to do it. You have to get in there and make an emotional connection with these parts. And sometimes that emotional connection is better made with something like movement. I also like that one goes down, the base of the drum, one is, going below, and that one flying the helicopter is transcendent, going above, literally, and Russell certainly picks up on that. And remember, anything you go to therapy for is likely to be for some form of trauma. And I know this word is overused, but it's also very descriptive. It's some disrupting of the natural flow of things, or you could call it blocking, but trauma is very descriptive of the negative blocking that happens to everyone. And it could be some neglect, the parents are too busy having cocktail parties or something, all the way to the worst forms of child abuse. Whatever it is, something is not being allowed to grow in a natural way. So these embodied things, these embodied therapies, are good for all forms of distress, really. Getting in touch with your body is a good idea, especially for those of us who live in the city. Well, now I'm not living in the city, but I typically do. And that removes you from nature a lot. And losing that connection is not good. And, constantly being in the virtual world is not good either. So I really enjoyed this talk with these two brilliant guys who are very self-aware, who've done a lot of work. And I think that they can help a lot of people through humor and through intelligence and through insight. And I'll put a link to this clip below, and you could go to Russell's. He has some subscription site where you can see the whole thing. I haven't seen it yet, but I will. So I hope that made sense, and I'll see you next time.